They came with wine, cola nuts, and big smiles, official introduction day. But before anyone could sit down, Madam Betty burst out screaming, "Pack these things and leave! I told my daughter to forget marriage. Marriage is a scam. I will not allow any of you to scam my only child's emotional well-being." The groom's family froze. The wine shook. Her daughter blinked. And just like that, the introduction turned into a public cancellation of marriage itself. Rita walked into the living room with a glow that could light mansion for 3 days straight. She didn't even drop her bag. She didn't sit. She didn't breathe properly. "Mommy!" she called out excitedly, her voice already shaking with happiness. "Mommy, see, Richard just proposed to me." She stretched out her left hand dramatically, almost blinding Madam Betty with the sparkle on her finger. "I'm happy," Rita added, smiling so hard her cheeks were already tired. For exactly 3 seconds, Madam Betty stared at the ring. Then her eyes widened, not with joy, with fear, alarm, emergency, red alert. "Rita," she said slowly, dropping the TV remote. "Rita, what did you just say?" Rita laughed, spinning around. "He proposed, like knelt down, ring, speech, shaking voice and everything. Mommy, this one is so serious." Madam Betty stood up abruptly. "Hey, sit down, she shouted, pointing at the sofa like a courtroom judge. Rita sat, still smiling. Madam Betty began pacing the room like a motivational speaker who lost her slides. "Rita, how many times have I told you?" she said dramatically. "Marriage does not define you. You are enough. You are complete. You are perfect the way you are." Rita burst into laughter. "Mom, please," she said, wiping tears from her eyes. "You joke too much? You should do stand-up comedy." Madam Betty frowned. "This is not a joke." Rita leaned forward. "So what do you want me to do? Enroll in baby mama school?" Madam Betty gasped. "Watch your mouth." Rita wasn't done. "My mates are getting married, Mom. I have worn chief bridesmaid dresses until I can open a boutique. I have tied jella for people till my neck knows marriage dates by heart." She stood up, gesturing wildly. "It's my turn now. Do you know how many weddings I've attended where I smiled through pain and ate small rice?" Madam Betty folded her arms. And Richard is a wonderful person." Rita continued passionately. "He's kind. He listens. He doesn't shout. He doesn't disappear. He prays. He cooks." Madam Betty paused. "He cooks? Yes," Rita nodded eagerly. "Sometimes more than me." Madam Betty squinted. "That's suspicious." Rita rolled her eyes. "He's an angel in human form, Mom. You'll like him." Madam Betty suddenly burst out laughing. Not gentle laughter. Not happy laughter. The kind of laughter that scares people. "My dear," she said between laughs, "I will not allow you to get married, whether to human or angel." Rita blinked. "Mom, what?" Madam Betty wiped imaginary tears. "Angel today, demon tomorrow. I know how these things work." Rita screamed in frustration. "Jesus Christ of Nazareth! What is wrong with marriage in this house?" Madam Betty sat down calmly. "Trauma." Rita threw herself on the sofa. "Mom, you can't punish me like this." "Who said it's punishment?" Madam Betty snapped. "It's prevention." "Prevention of happiness? Prevention of nonsense." There was silence. Then Rita spoke softly. "Richard wants to come for official introduction." Madam Betty stood up again like her house alarm was triggered. "What?" "With his family," Rita added quickly. "They're respectful, traditional, normal." Madam Betty laughed again. "No problem. They can come," Rita jumped happily. "Really?" "Yes," Madam Betty smiled sweetly, "so I can tell them face to face that marriage is canceled." Rita groaned loudly. "Mom, you'll embarrass me." Madam Betty shrugged. "Better embarrassment than divorce." Rita shook her head. "You haven't even met him." "And I don't need to," Madam Betty replied. "All marriages start with smiles and end with group chats and lawyers." Rita stood up angrily. "You can't control my life forever." Madam Betty stepped closer. "As long as you live in this house, I can," Rita whispered, voice shaking. "Then maybe I should leave." The room went silent. Madam Betty froze. Rita picked up her bag slowly. "I love you, Mom, but I want my own family." Madam Betty's voice softened, just for a second. "And I want you alive, happy, and not crying on my shoulder at 2 a.m. Rita turned back. "What if I'm happy?" Madam Betty looked away. "What if you're not?" They stared at each other, mother, daughter, love, fear, hope, trauma. Inside her room, Rita's phone buzzed. "Richard, did she like the ring?" Rita sighed, her hand shaking. Meanwhile, inside the sitting room, Madam Betty whispered to herself, "Over my dead body." This will never happen. A week later, Rita's street had never seen this level of action. By 8 a.m., gossip had already warmed up. On, today is the day. See car, see people. Jesus, this one fine like actor. Traditional drummers stood proudly at the gate, beating their drums with confidence, as if they were announcing a royal wedding. Boom, boom, para-pa-pam. Neighbors leaned on fences. Some climbed plastic chairs. Someone's auntie forgot her soup on fire. Oh, Rita's husband-to-be is fino, one woman whispered loudly. See his family, clean people. God when? Another added. Richard stepped out of the car looking calm, handsome, and well-ironed. He wore a simple outfit, nothing loud, just enough to say, I am respectful, not unserious. Behind him came his parents, aunties, uncles, cousins, friends, everyone smiling, carrying gifts. Cola nuts, bitter cola, palm wine, baskets neatly arranged. Good intention packaged very well. Richard smiled nervously. Is this the house? Rita, standing inside, peeped through the curtain and screamed softly. They're here. Her heart raced. Her hands shook. Her mother was suspiciously quiet. Mom? Rita called. Mommy, they're here, oh. No response. The drummers increased the tempo. Gee boom, Richard's mother whispered happily. She looks like a good family. At that exact moment, the door burst open. Madam Betty stepped out. In her beautiful golden gown, face straight, hands on waist, the drummers slowed, then stopped. Silence fell like network blackout. Madam Betty scanned the crowd slowly as if counting invaders. Who are all of you? Richard stepped forward politely and knelt. Good morning, Ma. My name is Richard. We came. Stand up, Madam Betty barked. Don't kneel for nonsense. Gasps everywhere. Rita rushed out. Mom, please. Madam Betty raised her hand. Rita, go inside. Mom, I said go inside. Rita froze. Richard's father cleared his throat politely. Madam, we came with peace. This is formal introduction. Introduction to what? Madam Betty interrupted. Suffering? People murmured. Richard swallowed. We came to ask for your daughter's hand in marriage, Madam Betty laughed, a loud, sarcastic laugh. Marriage? You people still believe in that thing? The aunties exchanged looks. Madam Betty pointed at the gifts. Carry all these things back. Richard's mother smiled awkwardly. Madam, these are just traditions. Tradition that leads to tears, Madam Betty snapped. Carry your cola nut, carry your wine, carry your destiny. Rita ran forward, tears already forming. Mommy, please. This is embarrassing. Madam Betty turned sharply. Embarrassing is divorce. Sit down. Richard tried again, calm but shaking. Ma, I love your daughter. I promise to protect her. Madam Betty clapped slowly. Promise? Do you know how many men promised like this? She stepped closer. Are you a mechanic, banker, pastor, human being? I'm a software engineer, Richard replied. Madam Betty nodded. Good. So you can engineer heartbreak too. Laughter erupted from some neighbors. Richard's friend whispered, This intro don't turn comedy skit. Madam Betty continued. Rita is my only child. I didn't raise her for midnight tears, motivational quotes, or women are strong nonsense. Rita broke down crying. Wit, Mom, please. I love him. Madam Betty's voice softened for half a second, then hardened again. Love doesn't pay therapy bills. Richard's mother stepped forward gently. Madam, please, let's talk woman to woman. Madam Betty laughed again. Woman to woman? Which woman? Married or traumatized? Everyone gasped. Drummers packed their drums slowly. Someone's uncle whispered, This thing done spoil. Rita fell on her knees. Mom, I beg you. I want to marry. I don't want to be alone forever. The entire compound went quiet. Madam Betty looked at her daughter kneeling. Her jaw tightened. You want to marry? She asked coldly. Yes, Rita cried. I'm tired of being afraid of life because of your fears. That hit. Madam Betty turned to Richard's family. Take your son and go. Richard panicked. Ma, please, go. Security men stepped forward. Richard looked at Rita helplessly. I'll come back, he whispered. Madam Betty pointed at the gate. Next time you come here, come alone with divorce papers. The family slowly picked up their gifts. The aunties hissed quietly. The drummers left in shame. As the gate closed, Rita screamed, I hate you for this! Madam Betty flinched. Rita cried uncontrollably. You've ruined my life. Madam Betty whispered to herself, Better ruined than destroyed. She turned and walked inside, leaving Rita crying on the ground. And the entire street knowing one thing, this marriage war had just begun. After that disastrous introduction day, Rita stopped crying. She didn't shout. She didn't break plates or threaten to leave the house. She simply disappeared. She locked herself in her room, door shut, curtains drawn, lights off. Food trays were dropped at her door. Water bottles stayed full. Her phone stayed silent. The first day, Madam Betty noticed, but ignored it. Let her rest, she muttered. Drama needs sleep. Second day, still nothing. Rita didn't come out, didn't greet Sora, didn't argue. By the third day, the silence became loud, too loud. Madam Betty stood in the kitchen holding a spoon she had forgotten to drop. No footsteps, no music, no sarcastic comments, just quiet. She walked slowly to Rita's door and knocked. Rita? No answer. She knocked again, louder. Rita, come and eat. Silence. Her chest tightened. Rita, this joke is not funny. She knocked harder. Open this door. Nothing. Fear crept in. Madam Betty pressed her ear to the door. No sound. Door lied. Her voice cracked for the first time in years. Rita, please. She knocked again, softer now. Open for Mommy. Minutes passed. Then the door creaked open. Rita stood there, eyes sunken, face pale, lips dry. Madam Betty gasped. Jesus, Rita! She rushed forward. What are you doing to yourself? Rita stepped back quietly and sat on the bed. I'm tired, she said weakly. Tired of fighting you. Tired of fighting love. Madam Betty sat beside her slowly. You think this is love? Rita looked up. Yes. Silence hung between them. Then Rita whispered, her voice breaking. Mommy, please allow me to marry my love, Richard. Madam Betty closed her eyes. Years of fear, years of trauma, years of control. She exhaled deeply. She nodded. Rita froze. You said yes? Madam Betty nodded again. I don't want to bury you before your time, she said quietly. Call him. Rita screamed in joy. She grabbed her phone immediately, hands shaking. She dialed Richard's number. Ring. Ring. Someone picked. Hello? It wasn't Richard. It was his mother. Rita smiled nervously. Good evening, Ma. This is Rita. The voice on the other end changed instantly. Why are you calling this number? Rita swallowed. Please, Ma. I want to apologize for what happened. My mother has agreed now. Before she could finish, don't ever call this number again, the woman barked. Rita flinched. Ma, please. Go and marry your mother, she shouted. My son is sick because of this nonsense. Rita's eyes widened. Sick? Yes. He has moved on. We don't want troublemakers in our family. Rita started crying. I'm sorry, Ma. Please let me speak to him. No. And if you truly care, stay away. I pray my son recovers fast. But don't ever cross our path again. The call ended. Beep. Rita stared at the phone. Frozen. Broken. Madam Betty watched quietly, not surprised. Rita whispered, Mommy, he broke up with me because of you. Madam Betty shook her head slowly. Like I said. She stood up. No man is ready for love anymore. He didn't even fight. That means he never care. Rita sobbed uncontrollably. Mommy, what should I do now? I love him. Madam Betty's voice hardened. Just 4 days, and he gave up. She folded her arms. If he truly loved you, he would have fought me, fought the world, fought his mother. She paused. But he ran. Rita cried harder. Madam Betty sighed. Love today has short battery life. Rita looked up angrily. So that's it? I should just move on? Madam Betty looked at her daughter carefully. No. Rita blinked. No? She repeated. No, Madam Betty said slowly. You will cry. You will heal and become your perfect self. It's been me and you, remember? She turned to leave, then stopped. Come here, you need to freshen up and eat. You're Richard? She shook her head. He is not in love. He is a heartbreak. Rita hugged her pillow tightly. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly. Inside, a young woman learned her first real heartbreak. And a Gen Z mother felt relief. Because somewhere deep inside, Madam Betty laughed. I just won my daughter back. 2 months passed. No crying, no screaming, no Richard. Rita returned to routine like a robot that had been reset without emotions. Work, home, sleep. Madam Betty watched her closely. Too closely. One quiet afternoon, a black luxury car slowly pulled up in front of the house. The engine purred like money. Madam Betty, who was sweeping the frontage, paused mid-sweep. The car door opened. Out stepped a handsome, well-dressed man, clean haircut, calm confidence, foreign aura written all over him. He walked to the gate and knocked gently. Good afternoon, Ma. Madam Betty eyed him from head to toe. Yes? She snapped. Who are you looking for? The man smiled politely. Please, Ma, I'm looking for Rita. Madam Betty's face changed instantly. Which Rita? Rita Gabriel, he said warmly. We were best friends in secondary school. I just returned from the US. I wanted to see her. I promised her then that I would come back for her. Madam Betty hissed loudly. She dropped her broom. Hold on, she said coldly. I'm coming. The man nodded respectfully and waited. 30 seconds later, Madam Betty returned with a long stick. The man blinked. Ma? She raised the stick dramatically. I have told you people to stop coming here. The man stepped back in shock. I'm sorry, Ma. I don't understand. My daughter is not interested in marriage, Madam Betty shouted. She is not interested in friendship. She is not interested in love. Leave her for me. The man raised his hands. Ma, please, I just wanted to greet her. Madam Betty swung the stick in the air. The man didn't wait. He turned, ran back to his car, almost forgetting to close the door, jumped in, and sped off like NEPA had restored light suddenly. Madam Betty stood there breathing heavily. Rubbish, she muttered. Imported nonsense. That evening, Rita returned from work tired. She greeted calmly. Good evening, Mommy. Madam Betty smiled sweetly. Welcome. Rita went inside, unaware that World War Love had just happened in her absence. Days later, it happened again. Another man, another knock, another excuse. Work colleague, church member, family friend. Betty chased them all away like mosquitoes. Soon, she upgraded her defense system. At night, when Rita was asleep, Madam Betty would tiptoe to her door, slowly, gently, like a thief in her own house. She would open the door quietly, check if Rita was breathing, then pick up her phone. She squinted at the screen. Who is Michael? Why is Daniel saying goodnight? Why is somebody sending emoji? She deleted messages, blocked numbers, removed contacts. I won't allow you to suffer heartbreak, she whispered. Marriage is a scam. One night, Rita woke up suddenly. Mom? Madam Betty froze like generator caught by PHCN. Yes, she said calmly, phone behind her back. What are you doing? Checking if you're breathing, Madam Betty replied quickly. Rita frowned. Okay. Madam Betty smiled and left, but the damage continued. Rita noticed her phone acting strange, chats disappearing, contacts missing. She confronted her mother. Mom, are you touching my phone? Madam Betty scoffed. Why will I touch your phone? Is it mine? Rita stared at her. Then one evening, Rita screamed from her room. My contacts! Madam Betty rushed in. What happened? All my chats are gone. Madam Betty shrugged. Network problem. Rita laughed bitterly. Network that deletes only men? Madam Betty folded her arms. I am saving you. Rita's voice shook. From what? Happiness? From pain, Rita cried. I'm not a child, Madam Betty replied sharply. As long as I am alive, you are my child. That night, Rita locked her door. Madam Betty stood outside listening. Her chest tightened. She whispered, I'm doing this because I love you. But love was beginning to look like fear. And fear was starting to look like control. Somewhere in the city, the handsome man from the U.S. sat in his car, confused, staring at the house number he had written down. Rita, he whispered, what kind of home is this? What happened to you? What happened to us? Days passed. It was one of those afternoons Rita liked. Quiet, predictable, safe. She sat alone at her usual corner table in the restaurant opposite her office, gently stirring her rice like someone with too many thoughts and not enough appetite. Then, Rita! Rita looked up. Both women screamed at the same time, chairs scraping as they jumped up, hugging like long-lost sisters. Jesus, is this you? Look at you, you're glowing. When did you come back? They laughed so loud, the waiter paused. Amanda finally sat down, shaking her head. I came to that bank for some transactions, she said, pointing outside, and hunger said I should respect myself and eat. Rita laughed. I work in the company opposite here. This is my lunch headquarters. Food was ordered. Memories followed. They talked about secondary school madness, teachers they feared, friends who married early, friends who disappeared. Then Amanda paused mid-bite. By the way, Emeka called me some days ago. Rita froze. Emeka? She repeated slowly. My Emeka? Yes now, Amanda nodded. He said he came to your house to check on you. Rita blinked. He did? Amanda leaned in. Your mom almost beat him with a stick. Rita nearly choked. What? Amanda rushed on. He said he didn't have your number and you're not active on social media. He just wanted to see you since he returned from the U.S. Rita's face drained of color. My mom chased him away, and didn't tell me? Amanda nodded, with confidence. Rita whispered, shocked. Is he really back from the U.S.? Yes-o. Rita grabbed Amanda's hand. Please give me his number. Amanda smiled knowingly and sent it immediately. Rita stared at the screen, hands shaking. She dialed. Ring. Ring. Hello? A familiar voice answered. Rita's breath caught. Emeka, it's Rita. Silence. Then, Rita? Wow, it's really you. They met days later. First at a cafe, then a park, then quiet places where nobody knew Madam Betty. Rita apologized deeply. I didn't know my mom chased you away. Emeka laughed lightly. She came out like a security agency with stick. Rita covered her face. I'm so sorry. Emeka's smile faded. She looked scared, not angry, scared. Scared. That sentence stayed with Rita. She opened up. About Richard, about the introduction disaster, about her mother deleting messages, about the fear disguised as love. Emeka listened quietly. Why would she hate marriage that much, he said finally. Or maybe she fears losing you. Rita sighed. But she's suffocating me. They sat in silence. Then Emeka leaned forward. What if we don't fight her? Rita frowned. What do you mean? What if we outsmart fear with peace? Rita raised an eyebrow. Explain before my mom arrests you. Emeka smiled. We don't come as marriage. We don't come as love. We come as normal. Rita gasped. Then they both laughed. Amanda joined them later and clapped excitedly. This is getting interesting. The plan was simple, but dangerous. Later that evening, Madam Betty sat on the edge of her bed, adjusting her pajamas slowly. 50, she muttered. God, I thank you. She walked into the kitchen where Rita was already cooking. Rita, she said calmly, on my 50th birthday, I don't want party. No noise, no people. Just cook something special for me. You and I. That's enough. Rita nodded immediately. No arguments, Mom. Madam Betty paused. Too easy. She squinted. Why are you smiling like that? Rita shrugged. I just love you. Madam Betty hissed. Go and turn the soup. The morning of the birthday arrived quietly. No music. No noise. Peace. Until vroom! Madam Betty looked up from the sitting room window. One car. Then another. Then another. She frowned. Rita, who is coming? Before Rita could answer, a truck pulled up with a stage. Then men started unloading canopies, then chairs. Madam Betty dropped her cup. Jesus Christ of Nazareth! In less than 30 minutes, her compound transformed. Red carpets, speakers, decorations. Madam Betty turned slowly to Rita. Did you do this? Rita smiled brightly. Yes, Mom. Rita, it's your 50th birthday, Rita said softly, and I need to celebrate you specially. Madam Betty burst into laughter. You this girl. She pulled Rita into a hug. You want to kill me with surprise? Guests started arriving. Her friends in their 50s. Some came with husbands. Some with married children. Some with grandchildren running around screaming, Grandma! Madam Betty's smile began to shake. Another arrived with her daughter and son-in-law. Laughter, love, family. Her throat tightened. Then, a black car pulled up. Madam Betty froze. The door opened. Out stepped Master Gabriel, Rita's father. Madam Betty almost choked on her spit. What is he doing here? She dropped her fan and stormed toward him. You, she barked. Why are you here? Who invited you to my event? Mr. Gabriel opened his mouth. But before he could speak, Betty's best friend, Auntie Morenike, stepped between them. Betty, she said calmly, not today. Madam Betty scoffed. What do you mean not today? Auntie Morenike held her hands. We are all here for a purpose. Madam Betty laughed bitterly. Purpose to reopen old wounds? Yes, Morenike replied gently, and to heal them. Madam Betty pulled her hand away. Before she could explode again, another car pulled up. Then the door opened, and out stepped Emeka. Dressed in a clean white outfit, calm, confident, respectful. Behind him, a few friends, family members, cola nuts, wine. Madam Betty turned slowly, her eyes locked with Rita's. Rita met her gaze, smiled gently. Mom, she said softly, it's a long story, but I'll surely tell you everything. Madam Betty staggered back. So this is it, she whispered, an ambush. Music slowed. Guests began whispering. This is deep O. Drama at 50? Gotta beg. Madam Betty looked around. Her friends, their families, her past, her fears. She laughed suddenly, a sharp laugh. So everybody gathered to attack me today? Auntie Morenike stepped forward. No one is attacking you, Betty. Mr. Gabriel finally spoke. We just want to talk. Madam Betty snapped. I don't talk to ghosts. Emeka stepped forward and bowed respectfully. Good afternoon, Ma. Madam Betty glared. You, yes, Ma. You are brave, she said sarcastically, or stupid. Emeka smiled calmly. Maybe both. Laughter broke tension. Madam Betty shook her head. Rita, she said, voice shaking, after everything, this is what you did? Rita stepped closer. I didn't do it to hurt you, she said. I did it because I love you. Madam Betty's eyes watered. I wanted peace, she whispered. And you deserve it, Rita replied. But not at the cost of my life. Silence. The cake sat untouched. 50 candles waited. Madam Betty looked at them, then at Rita, then at Emeka, then at Gabriel. She inhaled deeply. Fine, she said slowly. Let's talk. The crowd exhaled, but nobody knew. This conversation would change everything, because secrets don't like birthdays. They like public confession. The music had stopped. The drummers were silent. Even the children, sensing the tension, had gone quiet. All eyes were on Madame Betty. Rita stepped forward slowly, holding the microphone with trembling hands. "Mom," she began softly, "I chose to celebrate you today in a different way." The crowd leaned in. "You look happy," Rita continued, "but deep down, you are not happy, because of a past you refuse to share, and a pain you refuse to let go." Madame Betty inhaled sharply. Rita turned to face her fully. "You didn't just hate marriage, Mom. You were running from something." Madame Betty suddenly snapped. "How would I let go of a past that swallowed my mother?" Gasps. She took the microphone from Rita with shaking hands. "I watched my mother," Betty said, voice cracking, "being maltreated by her husband, my father." Murmurs spread through the crowd. She was beaten, broken, humiliated. Betty wiped her tears angrily. She sustained injuries that later crippled her. She always told me, "My best life was when I was single." Her voice dropped. That regret killed her. She never recovered from the stroke. Silence. "I promised myself I would do it better," Betty continued. "I married the love of my life, Gabriel." She looked at him briefly, then away. But just 3 months in, the romantic husband became a late-coming husband. Gabriel bowed his head. "We barely talked. We barely laughed. For 6 years I was married and lonely." Tears streamed freely now. "One day," Betty whispered, "he came home and met divorce papers. I chose myself." She looked at Rita. "That was why I vowed to protect you from a scam called marriage." She broke down. Gabriel stood up slowly. "I've waited 28 years for this chance," he said quietly. "A chance to explain myself to my wife, Betty." Rita glanced at him in shock. "My precious daughter Rita would be 29 years in a few weeks." "My intention for marriage," Gabriel said, "was to have a peaceful home." He sighed deeply. "But months into our marriage, Betty changed." Betty stiffened. She became defensive. Every question felt like an accusation. Every effort I made was rejected. The crowd listened silently. I was accused of things I knew nothing about. The only way to avoid domestic violence was to stay away. He paused. "I came home late, not because I didn't care, but because I was afraid." Betty covered her mouth. "One day," Gabriel continued, "I came home and saw divorce papers. I begged." He looked at her. "She said she needed peace, and that was the end." He shook his head slowly. "I never knew her parents' struggles. She never told me." Auntie Moronique stepped forward, adjusting her glasses. "Betty," she sighed, "I listened to your husband in your absence years ago." Betty looked up. "And I realized something painful," Moronique continued. "You carried your parents' pain into your marriage." The words hit hard. "You planted their wounds in your husband's life," she said gently, "and you almost planted the same wounds in your daughter. Just look at us. We are your friends and your mates. We are married. Some of our own children are married, and some of us have grandchildren. Yes, marriage is not a child's play, but we are winning battles at every stage because we choose to let go of our past, we let go of our pain, and we decided to make our marriage work." The crowd murmured. "Today," Moronique raised her voice, "we are not just celebrating 50 years of your life." She turned to Rita. "We are witnessing Rita's official introduction." Shock rippled through the compound. "She is in love with Amika," Moronique continued, "and she didn't want you to chase him away the way you've been doing." Ameka stepped forward respectfully and bowed. Gabriel walked slowly to Betty. "Do you know," he said softly, "I never remarried." Betty's breath caught. "I missed you," Gabriel added. Betty collapsed into tears. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I didn't know you were different from my dad." She broke down completely. Gabriel pulled her into a hug. The crowd clapped slowly, then loudly. Rita cried openly. The drummers picked up softly. Ameka's family brought forward the gifts: cola nuts, wine, smiles. Madame Betty wiped her face and looked at Rita. "Go and bring me your man," she said weakly. "I want to bless your union." Rita laughed through tears. The official introduction was done. Laughter returned. Music rose. Pain loosened its grip. At 50, Madame Betty finally learned that not all marriages are her mother's marriage. And Rita finally learned that healing is louder than fear. A week later, the sun rose gently, as if even the sky wanted peace. Rita stood before the mirror in her wedding dress, smiling and crying at the same time. No fear, no doubt, just joy. Outside, Ameka waited, calm, proud, ready. When Rita walked in, Ameka's breath caught. "My wife," he whispered. Their vows were simple, honest, strong. As they said, "I do," the crowd erupted in cheers. Their joy knew no bounds. Madame Betty sat in the front row, holding Gabriel's hand. For the first time in decades, she wasn't afraid. She smiled through tears, not tears of pain, but tears of release. After the wedding, Gabriel and Betty stood side by side. No bitterness, no blame, just two people who finally understood each other. "We lost years," Betty said softly. "But we found peace," Gabriel replied. They reunited, not in fear, but in healing, and decided to live together happily, choosing love with wisdom this time. Rita hugged her mother tightly. "Thank you for letting go," she whispered. Madame Betty smiled. "Thank you for teaching me how." As Rita and Emeka drove off, laughter filling the car, Madame Betty watched them go. Not with fear, but with hope. Because Rita and Emeka's bold step didn't just heal Rita, it healed a broken marriage, a wounded past, and a woman who finally learned that love is not always a scam. So, my darlings, I think we have learned from this story that sometimes the real enemy of love isn't a man. It's unhealed pain. Rita chose courage, Emeka chose patience, and Madame Betty chose to finally let go. Because when healing begins, generational fear ends. Remember, love isn't a scam. Unhealed trauma is. If this story touched you, like, share, and subscribe. Drop a comment. Was Madame Betty protecting her daughter or hurting her? Share your experience also. We would love to learn from it.